Hey guys, welcome to another Kiksta review. So I just got back today from watching Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and this is going to be my non-spoiler review of the film. I'll be releasing my full spoiler review in a few days' time. So let's get into it. So straight off the bat, my initial thoughts of this film is I liked it. I really enjoyed it. It was a good, fun film. Wasn't expecting much of it because I've kind of been really down on the MCU of late. They've had a lot of, in my opinion, bad entries, especially in Phase 4. And so going into this one, I had very low expectations. But at the same time, I had some hope because I know that James Gunn kind of does make these films sort of in an isolated way. And I felt like this one would be the case too. And it very much was so. This film can exist without any of the other MCU movies. Obviously, it helps knowing the previous Guardians of the Galaxy movies, but this one definitely almost stands alone within this current phase of Marvel. So I think the greatest strength of this film is that it has a really strong emotional core, which is something that's prevalent throughout all three of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies at this point. Without getting into spoilers, it's very much centered around Rocket Raccoon and a story of him and his backstory. Very emotional stuff there. A lot of animal rights themes throughout the whole film. So definitely that core really carries the film the whole way along. Especially considering the Guardians movies are very much known for their like sort of goofy sense of humor and their sci-fi action, all that kind of stuff. At the same time, they're kind of always surprisingly deep in the meaning behind them and the story they're trying to tell. Especially compared to a lot of Marvel films in the last 4 or 5 years, which have seemed lacking in that regard. These ones always kind of surprisingly stand out as being quite heavy to take. So the basic plot is at the very beginning, Rocket is injured. Without getting into as many spoilers, he's injured. He's kind of sidelined throughout the film. But there's flashbacks of him going along, and the main villain is someone known as the High Evolutionary, who's basically almost a Hitler type figure, where he's trying to basically cleanse the world of any like weakness, and just trying to breed like a superior race of beings, and that he's trying to do. And yeah, so the Guardians are basically on this adventure or journey to basically save Rocket, and that obviously ties into coming up against the High Evolutionary. And I definitely say that performances all around definitely are the best part of this film. All of the Guardians knock it out of the park. They're really hitting their stride in their roles, very comfortable in who they are, and they've done this a number of times now. But in particular, the guy who plays the High Evolutionary, I don't know his name, but he's a really good actor, and he brings a lot of menace and gravitas to his role of the High Evolutionary. You believe you are fearful of him. And that's great because that's severely lacking in a lot of modern day superhero films. And so it was great to see an actual decent villain for once. And since the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, they've kind of rewritten the rules in terms of humor in superhero movies. Pretty much every movie since then has wanted to kind of be like Guardians of the Galaxy in some way or another, and to varying success with that. I think a lot of them have failed in that regard. But so in terms of the question of the humor in this film, it's obviously peppered all the way throughout, but I'd say it's like a 60-40 split in terms of what lands and what doesn't. I'd say about 60% of the jokes land and are pulled off well, and generate a genuine laugh. The other 40 kind of fall flat. Some of them just feel like retreads, particularly with like Drax and Mantis's characters. They kind of just become a one-note type of joke where it's the same thing over and over and over. But there are definitely some lines with like Star-Lord and Nebula and Rocket and like a bunch of characters just really kind of shine in terms of the humor in this film. And I mentioned about the emotional core of this film being almost an animal rights story. I think whilst I do believe it is the most well executed part of the film, I do also believe at times it kind of steps over the line of almost guilting us into feeling emotions for this story. It's almost like it's playing with our feelings, this film. And I'm not saying that's what all films are essentially meant to do. They're meant to play on our feelings, but I feel like this one really does delve into that further, because these are animals and they're cute looking and all that, and it really just tries to tug on our heartstrings with that. So like I wouldn't say it's a big negative, it's a slight negative that I just feel sometimes it goes a bit too far in that regard to really play on our feelings. So I have a lot of great things to say about this film, which I'll go into deeper when I do my full spoiler review. But if I want to mention a few of the things that I disliked about the movie, the first one is mainly about the pacing. So this movie has an issue in terms of, for one, it's very long. It's almost a 2.5 hour movie, which is pretty bloated. And whilst you feel like a bunch of scenes could be omitted, they could have just really either got through a lot quicker, or they could have just removed that. Some of them just, they were playing gags for stupid jokes and whatnot, and they wanted those to play out. I felt like, okay, you need some of that. It's a Guardians movie at the end of the day, but they could have just not had as many as they did and still conveyed the same feel of a film. But in terms of the pacing, most movies have a first, second, and third act, but this one kind of just has a first and a third act. The third act basically starts halfway through the film and takes up the whole second half of the film. And so when it starts, you're wondering, okay, when does this scene end before before we get to the real fight? But you slowly come to realize that, oh no, we're here, we're right in the thick of this, and it's just gonna keep building. And whilst I believe there's a lot of great payoffs and a lot of great scenes within the third act and in the first act too, it just feels the pacing is a bit off. It just kind of trods along in the first hour, and then just all of a sudden, boom, we're in the end game, and we're in the final act. Another disappointment I had was Adam Warlock's character. I'm not very familiar with him, but I have read the Infinity Gauntlet, and obviously he's essential to that story. And so, they teased him in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 that he was being created, I believe. And so we thought he was going to come in Infinity War and Endgame, because that's where logically he should have arrived. He didn't, that's in the past. But now they were introducing him, which kind of felt like, okay, why are they introducing him? But we'll give it a shot. Didn't feel right. His character was just almost a joke at times. It was kind of played for laughs rather more than anything. Didn't contribute anything to the film. You can remove him from this movie and it changes nothing to the story, basically. So that was disappointing, because I was kind of excited to see what they would do with him, because I've read the Infinity Gauntlet, and he's a really great character in it. So I was, definitely disappointed by him in this film. One other issue is they have a really great story for this film regarding Rocket and what they want to do with his character. It's very clear, it's very well executed the whole way throughout the film, but it is also equally clear that because I feel they invested so much into his story, that they feel like they don't really know what to do with the other characters throughout this film. Like this is very much Rocket's movie. It's all about him, basically, even though he's kind of not, well, I'm not going to spoil, he's not in it too much, but it's just, they kind of feel like they don't really know what they're doing with the other characters. The Star-Lord, he's the main character, and at times it just feels like he's only there to serve Rocket's story, not his own. None of them are really on their own journey. There are some slight payoffs for the characters towards the end of the film, but ultimately they didn't feel built up throughout enough to make the payoff really worth it. It felt a bit weak at the end there. But other than those few minor gripes, I had a great time with the film. I had a lot of fun, enjoyed it. It's definitely a good night out to just enjoy and switch the mind off a bit. The plot is not too heavy. It's pretty simple and straightforward. I think there are some issues throughout it, which I'll mention in my spoiler review. But look, I think it's a solid 7 out of 10. That's what I would give it. So that's my non-spoiler review, and make sure to check out the full spoiler one in a few days' time. Thanks, guys. Bye.